Welcome back from the break. So for today's highlight, today's keynote, we've got a very special speaker with Laura. Laura has been in the industry for quite a long while. We were colleagues at one point in time as well. And she's been through the ranks in terms of application of MT from very specific, but also very, very large environments. So I'm pretty sure this is going to be a very interesting talk from somebody who's, I guess you could call her MT battle hardened. So with no further ado, Laura, floor is yours.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. Can you all hear me well? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Okay, so welcome. I'm very excited to be the second user track speaker for the first time. And as all first time, there will be version 2 without bugs. So let's just bear with me. The title of my keynote is, I once said to my boss, SMT will never work. And I will explain you soon what happened. Just some premises. To give you a little bit of context, I'm coming from the business side. I have been in this industry roughly 20 years, working with MT also roughly 20 years, always on the bad side, dark side of the buyer, and corporate user, so worked especially for multinationals. I'm giving also some examples in my presentation, not meant necessarily to promote any company, and of course the views are mine, according to my experience, my exposure, not necessarily the ones of the employers I worked for or I'm currently working for. This is just to show off that I worked in the legal industry for a couple of years before. So once upon a time, in the good old times of the deterministic rule-based outpost, how many of you were there in the rule-based? Okay. I noticed many of those have already retired quite some time ago. So we were using this system, and I'm just pasting here a little piece, just a test to keep you awake. The key to a successful MT system lies in mastery over verbal elements, explicit or implicit, which means mastery over their semantico-syntactic properties, and so on and so on. In this system, grammar has compressed these 10,000 verbs into approximately 100 semantico-syntactic categories at one level of specificity on the semantico-syntactic tree. Who of you, without looking at search engines? So, which system was it, if anybody of you knows? It didn't work, but which one it was? The logo system. Yes, it was a system of rules, pretty sophisticated system. But Scott was the founder and also the chief architect of this system. Unfortunately, died last year of COVID. And he wrote in an interesting article also about how this system actually kind of compared to biological neural nets, but nothing to do, and he specifies it very well in his papers, with automatic, artificial neural nets. He said it doesn't train automatically by backpropagation or by unsupervised learning. This is something that you really have to manually tweak in a way. But it was a very good system for our purposes. And then we received a telephone call from somebody of a company named after Warren Weaver, not mentioning it because somebody wanted to revive that name, so I don't want to promote anybody, but so saying we have some samples of SMT. And I looked at that from my very linguistic background and I said, hey, this is incorrect concordance, morphology is not working, word order is not okay, grammar is broken. And I said to my boss, you know what, forget about it. SMT will never work. That tells you how visionary I was, of course. Very good lessons from somebody who knew something about the diligence and skills, Samuel Johnson, the author of the first English dictionary. So he knew something about, going on. Few things are impossible to diligence and skills, and that's what you all, I think, in this room have demonstrated during the years. And machine translation quality journey went up and up and up. Rule-based, we went through statistical, through neural, even adaptive systems. So, well, you're allowed to be critical. Maybe some rule-based systems were very good, and I see Mikkel is agreeing with me as well. So it's not that linear as it seems, but we reached, I think, quality levels that are kind of unprecedented. And then people started saying, and Christian gave us an example yesterday, you know, we reach human parity, indistinguishable from human translation. And the industry started panicking, of course, and all the people in the room here, like, hey, horrified, that cannot be true, that's not human parity, and so forth. Yeah, maybe it's not, but it's kind of unquestioned for many customers of MT and users of MT that machine translation reached and can reach the necessary quality level. And why that? First of all, you have baselines that are continuously improving with state-of-the-art techniques, with data being injected into that. But also customization has become quite a commodity. You can find it almost everywhere, through LSPs, through specialized companies, as a kind of self-service model, if you're looking at the big tech who are providing that kind of things. So adaptive solutions, in some cases, are making the training of custom engines even superfluous, because you can just upload your data or post-edit and they will adapt while you're writing. There is a big promise from large language models to use this feature similarity across languages to make also better support for low resource languages. So we are expecting that to become better and better in the future as well. And there are also companies offering very interesting services where they compare, assess different systems according to a uniform methodology. They give you a very nice report, and they also rank the system for you, they configure it, so you basically, as a custom end users, need to do almost nothing. So what I want to say here is, like, reaching this necessary level of quality for organization is kind of unquestioned. And what is this necessary level of quality? So what is actually the so-called good enough? That's not an answer for this. I found this article from Kirti Vashi, who is a technology evangelist at one translation company in February 2022, writes something very interesting to me. So first of all, MT solutions are essential to the global enterprise mission. Totally true. But he's also writing about the fact that more and more content is translated for customers without ever going through post-editing services. And I found these two sentences quite interesting. So the business value of the translation is defined by the utility to the customer, by the basic understandability, the availability on demand, the overall customer experience impact, rather than linguistic perfection, which we are all striving to anyhow. So the linguistic quality of the translation does matter. And does matter, so it's not that I'm saying it doesn't matter, so please go on what you're doing, but has a lower priority in some cases than speed, cost, and digital agility. And I like this concept of digital agility especially. I'm not sure about the speed, because I think speed you can probably achieve as long as you push new servers and more GPUs and more things, and then you can, so it's a question of money. But I'm actually telling you about 3 cases that I have seen in my 20 years of experience in machine translation, and how different actually the requirements are in those cases, and where in those cases, especially in the selection of which technologies to work with, and with which kind of things we needed to do. First case, and that's the most common one, machine translation as a support in a human translation process combined with post-editing. I'm talking here about very early days even. It was 2002, so quite some years ago, and that the company was quite a early adopter of the technology. Then we had a case for raw machine translation of a large amount, so really of big data, translating roughly 400 million words a day. More for cross-language retrieval, so for this knowledge discovery, for making sure that we could find in a big set of documents, the relevant ones to then submit to some human intervention, or for further polishing. So this case didn't require any post-editing because it was included in a product, and it was really for helping search. And the last case is MT as I would call it corporate productivity tool, but this is including lots of cases. And it's more where MT really enters the organization and helps people to be more effective and more productive in different ways. Think about internal communication, HR, newsletters, virtual assistants, chatbots, IT support, customer complaint, all of these kind of cases. And if I look at the requirements we had in those cases, and I try to prioritize them somehow, of course it's not that black and white, but some of them way more than others. So if you're looking at a case of post-editing, of course quality is paramount. Accuracy, fluency, whatever, so you need to have it at the top. Including integration with your translation memory system, with other systems that you're using, and some security as well, concerns. But if I look at the second case, so the big data case, there I think that quality was important, but not as important as scalability and automation were. So in terms of, okay, we have this amount of data, who is actually, at this point in time, the vendor who can provide me with a solution that can get there, so that it can get translating all this data, putting it in a database, and on a regular basis. And quality was important, especially accuracy, because of the fact that it was used for a cross-language retrieval task. And security was less of a concern because the data was kind of publicly available. In the case 3, as a productivity tool, integration plays a big role. So how is machine translation integrating with all the tools that you're using for supporting the different parts of the organization? Security has a huge role because data is confidential, it's a business information, lots of time this internal purpose machine translation touches legal, contracts, merger and acquisition, so you really need to be careful about what are you doing with this data. Quality is of course very important, and then automation maybe comes a little bit lower because you don't have large amount of data to process. It's really like more submitting documents and getting something back. And I also want to shortly touch about these, so the submerged business of translations inside corporations. I found a very interesting paper by some researchers in Portugal who actually interviewed especially multinational organizations to see how they were using translation, they were doing translation, and they discovered that there is lots of translation work happening that is not flowing through LSPs. It's translation happening within the organization, done by people who are actually hired for a different task. So discussing, I think, with somebody, Mary, I think, the other day, about the fact that it's called paraprofessional translation, right, in technical terms. And I found these two things very interesting. They say these people expect magic tools. So 90% of them uses machine translation within the organization. Actually, 90% reported using Google Translate, which if I were their employer would be careful. How are they using it? Are they sending data just to the free online systems? What are the implications in terms of data loss? But okay. So they do it for cutting costs, right? And then when the task is too difficult, and when it becomes a matter of life and death, and also legal responsibility, they go out to language service providers. So, that said, I'm not saying that quality is a problem solved, not at all. But what are actually companies, and especially if you're looking at my case and my experience, corporate users of large organizations looking for next to quality. So what is actually appealing when they are selecting vendors to work with, partners to work with, universities to work with? And I think it comes down to four things, and I saw them luckily also yesterday in your presentations coming back. Automation, integration, well-being, and sustainability. And I'm going to shortly talk about each of those in my perspective and according to my experience. In automation, you couldn't say everything and nothing, because automation is a very large subject. But I think there are 3 points that are kind of pain points still in automating the process of machine translation for end users. One is data collection and preparation, especially when you're doing custom systems. the data management and the portability of the assets and artifacts that are created by doing preparing the data for machine translation, and the feedback loop. So I'm saying it's a pain to do data preparation because because of that case that you saw before of this hidden translation layer within the organization. Sometimes people who are using machine translation can be this corporate user who are not in the translation department. And when we talk to vendors, say, can you customize the system? They ask us, okay, do you have data? Where? Because yes, we translated it, but we didn't save it. We didn't think it was useful, right? So we just save it, but then it's all maybe stored on a hard drive or somewhere else that it cannot be found anymore. So this is a very interesting case for people to actually customize engines from within organization, but it's a pain. So I think powerful vendors understand this. And what they do is kind of plug into the process of the customers. They look at the data workflow. They help them understand how to take this data, how to prepare it, how to align it, and how to customize. And they take away the burden. So business people are lazy, like me. So that's basically, they don't want to do much, right? So no, jokes apart, I think really they take away the burden from the organization. The second thing is data management. So yes, we do prepare this data, but then there is, so we take the data, we align it, we customize an engine, and then we use the engine for quite a while, and then we forget about it. Then at a certain point we think, hey, we should probably improve it. Okay, what did we use for training the first version again? I don't know anymore. So the data management is some kind of split. So the raw data management is done on side of the customer. The data management of the data that is actually used for training is done on the side of the vendor. And there is no platform in the middle that actually connects them and makes the customer and the vendor look at them in the same synchronous way. So that's actually quite a problem. So also what for me it's a little bit of a question as well, whether we should go in that direction, but data is not portable. So if I customize a system with one vendor and this vendor creates this data for me, prepares it for me, I pay something to vendor one. If I want to use these artifacts for another purpose, and it's not always possible to get these artifacts back. So eventually if I want to switch vendor, or if I even want to use data for another task, like terminology extraction, creation of a translation memory, it's pretty difficult for me to do because I will not have this data and I will have to repeat again this effort. So not very well automated either. And a feedback loop. So feedback loop works pretty well in translation environments because of course you have translation memories, you can download, you do post-editing, and you can repeat. But I think there is still also, let's say, a gap where people are doing post-editing within the organization, like these paraprofessional translators who have actually lots of subject matter expertise, so they really can do very interesting corrections to your system, but these corrections are not captured. So I think it would be nice also to have some kind of light-weighted system that can take this feedback and push it back to the customizations at a certain point. But there is also kind of need for personal customization. So not really like at the corporate level, not saying like, yes, we have a set of corporate terminology and data that we want to use, but also, sometimes users really want to have their own specific things to add to the custom engine. So how to do that? And we had this case actually. Integration, that's a little bit more interesting, I think. So what are actually the users' expectations about how a system should integrate? And I can tell you something. I think, and I don't know if it's the truth, but I think that people think, okay, machine translation exists. So we have Google Translate, DeepL, Microsoft, whatever. So every system that you can think about. So if it exists in writing, it should exist also in speech, for example, right? Because why not? It translates, so what's the difference? So the general user, not you, of course, doesn't know about all the work that goes behind the creation of this system. So users are more and more, that's my experience, current experience as well, expecting a pervasive experience. So machine translation should be everywhere, right? Within your corporate productivity tools, if you're doing office work, like, you know, like I cannot mention again, but okay, office productivity tools, you know what I'm talking about. But enabler in real-time communication, so virtual assistants and chatbots, I think we have heard lots of presentation about these as well. But also multilingual content translated or translatable, so having widgets within portals, having context pre-translated within portals, that's a very interesting use case. And this is valid for internal customers, so basically people who are using machine translation from within an organization, but also their end users. Also end users are expecting this. They are expecting to have communication in their own language to the customer service. And I think there were 2 presentations this morning about this. So, and also the content translated or translatable within you know, applications and platforms. And I thought here this would be interesting to mention the case of Airbnb, translating this huge amount of reviews and putting it in the back in the system, because it's users are kind of expecting, and that's actually improving their user experience. And again, so integration is not only in writing, so you will see more and more people requesting integration. So I've seen actually, had some requests of automatic interpreting. I said, well, we are not there yet. Why not? Is there nothing in Teams? Is there nothing in Zoom that can do this for us? Well, not yet. So integration with auto captioning, machine translation, speech-to-speech. There is lots of demand, and I was glad to see lots of posters yesterday about this on video translation, audio translation, e-learning, where indeed you have the speech-to-text, text-to-speech. And yes, I didn't hear anybody mention it, but the multiverse, who knows where it will bring us. Zuckerberg made a promise, like no language left behind. There will be a universal speech translator. So we need to see if we're getting there. But that's actually kind of the expectation of the user. So I think the end user, the common users, are so accustomed to have these technologies on their mobile phones, on the applications that they're using every day. This is where they're going to get into. Integration with other natural language processing applications, and we saw also some examples this morning. So name entity recognition, thanks for the definition to who did it this morning, so I don't need to go into that. Detection of personal identifiable information for screening, whether a document is safe to send somewhere or not. Sentiment analysis, big deal for, you know, measuring what's the level of acceptance of your products, but also measuring what's the internal satisfaction of the customers, you know, interpreting NPS scores within organizations. Sometimes you get answers, but you get them in another language, so you want to machine translate and kind of catch automatically what is said in there. Text classification, also a case for, you know, classifying NPS responses, fraud detection, cybersecurity. So there are all things where MT integrates with other tech. Auto-summarization could also be a case. So you're translating things and then you want to just have a little summary for people to submit to and say, hey, this is the document, it comes from Chinese, but now you have your short abstract in English. If you're interested in that, then you can read the entire MT. So it's kind of imperative these technologies are actually focusing on low resource languages as well, because we know it's a problem. So like lots of this is actually English centric. And then one other thing, how technology integrates, whether it integrates with speech, with no speech, with NLP, but there is a very, very interesting requirement that is actually on top of the list for everybody in the corporate organizations, and it's especially in highly regulated industry like the one I'm working in, is data security. Not only data security, data residency requirements, so in which region do you put your servers, basically, data privacy, confidentiality, anonymization, user security as well, what is happening with the user's information that flows into a system, formal compliance with the regulation. What I've noticed is that many times, this is a little bit of a problem because the people who are selecting machine translation systems are mostly more nearer, let's say, to the translator side of the business. So maybe for to different departments, and they do not have a direct link with the IT organization. Then you talk to the IT organization, you get a very different picture of what your requirements might be. So do it very early if you're not doing these kind of things very early in the process. Now about well-being, nice smiley. So well-being, I think we in the industry talked a lot about the well-being of translators, how to reduce their cognitive effort when they're doing post-editing. Are they tired of reading, and how is their eye movement tracking? So how my movement going? So we track it, we try to understand. So yeah, but now it's also time to talk about a little bit, you know, the well-being of the end users. So, and this, I mean, more like how can MT contribute also to the well-being of the end users, and why is it important for corporate organizations to look at this aspect? And what does it translate to for people who are actually proposing machine translation solutions? So there is a major trend in the corporate organization to do geographical centralization of functions, meaning that for cutting costs or whatever other reason, some functions are positioned in one side of the world, and then they become one language centric. Mostly English, by the way, but it's not necessarily because they are centralized in the US or in the UK or in Australia. It's because English is kind of the language of the business. So yes, but what I didn't want to say here, sorry. Yeah, but actually companies are more and more looking, so having a very, very strong agenda for diversity and inclusion purposes, right? To make people feel better at work, feel more included, feel you're part of the business. So in this case, and you see that this is very pervasive throughout the organization, so it spans through, you know, HR, talent acquisition, recruitment, onboarding, policies and procedures, talent management, e-learning, performance reviews, internal communication, so it's everywhere. And that is actually especially one of the funding, let's say, the drivers behind looking into low resource languages as well. Because yes, lots of things could be covered by the highly resource languages, but more and more we are actually looking at covering low resource languages within organizations, corporate organizations as well, to make everybody feel included. Actually, I had a request recently for Amharic. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Does anybody know where it's spoken? Good. I didn't know, so I had to look up. Very good. So, and it's not even a very, probably not even one very low resource language, but there are even worse low resource languages, Amharic, sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrongly. But this is really an agenda point for big organization, and it's actually quite nice to see that organizations are looking into that. The announcement from Microsoft, from Google, well, Meta with a project on No Language Left Behind. But I'm not only mentioning the big corps. I think that here there is also lots of work that has been done actually by, of course, by academia and by smaller organizations as well. I can remember Apertium doing something in the past with some languages, and Hilde did a lot, I think, as well. So not only big organizations. And one thing is diverse, but then there is also the inclusion part. And that's where people are kind of expecting machine translation to go towards. So this gender neutrality in the sense of, and don't be biased towards only masculine forms of the doctor. We saw it yesterday, and how difficult this problem is. So solving gender, solving formality is something that certainly is something that we are looking into. Still, there is lots of things that probably are left to humans at the moment, but I have hopes after seeing some of the talks yesterday as well. And then there is diversity, there is inclusion, and there is accessibility. And accessibility is also a big deal. And if you look at, I put here, so how many millions actually were granted to this project. Sign On was a nice poster yesterday as well, for hard of hearing people, deaf people, to have machine translation at their disposal. This is something that, to me, it's kind of where the future is going, because people will be expecting soon to have integrated in their productivity tools and their chats and their video calling systems, not only MT and speech to speech, but also these kind of things, because you don't want to leave anybody behind. Recently, actually, we even had a request for Braille translation. I had to look into that because I really did know nothing about it. But that's something that exists. I don't hear it lots. Is anybody of you involved with any Braille translation? No. Okay. Interesting. So something that I also heard of, and that's of course a very complicated thing because it involves sometimes even hardware equipment. So it's not only, yes, and mostly it's to print, but it's also there are machines to read, and so it's pretty complicated field as well. And then I will just shortly talk about what I think that the sustainability means for machine translation, in my opinion, of course. And I was reading about sustainability in the machine translation field in some of the articles, and I kind of couldn't find a common definition. So I think that it's a very broad concept with lots of interpretation. But for me, if I take really the dictionary, nothing else, and I look at what sustainable means, I see two main areas. So the business area, where sustainable means that it can be continued for a long time, so it can be at the same level, so that I can create this continuity in my process. And from corporate social responsibility, it has more of a, let's say, using methods that do not harm the environment, but also don't harm people. Environment in the larger sense, not only nature, but also people. And I also think that corporate organizations are looking into this more and more. If I think, like, of the business perspective, especially, I think of finance, technology, and education/risk management. And what do I mean to say? Creating a sustainable business for machine translation for a corporate organization means also to be able to predict what my usage is going to be, what my costs are going to be. I can tell you there are headaches when you're trying to compare pricing models from the vendors, because there are people who are doing it in words, then in characters, then in pages. So how at all are you able to predict what your costs are going to be? A predictable return on investment, and we lots of time forget, so okay, we have the case for machine translation, yes, let's customize, but in the end, who is using it? How many hours are you factually saving by doing machine translation? Is it really worth doing? So you have also to have this kind of predictability in your business model. And where do you find the funding to do this? It's also a very interesting thing for me. So we need to not only find funding now, but know that this is going to be a project that will continue for many years. So it's just the start of something that you will continue paying, right, for the service, because people are not stopping using it. So people are using it and using it more and more and more as soon as you give them the tool. On technology, I think what we are looking for is the flexibility from partners to cooperate with the business, to be able to grow together with the state-of-the-art findings. So take along the research that has been done in the academia, put it in practice, and get out with that. Able to scale, capable of evolving without telling to customers, hey, we did a major change and now you have to start from scratch, refactor everything you have, because this is a nightmare for many organizations. It's also systems that create analytics that we can use in business information. So like, how is the system used? Who is using it? For which purposes? Like, which language pairs? This create trend analysis that is very interesting, not only for understanding where do we have to put our concentrate our attention to when we are doing customizations, but also for internal purposes to understand, hey, who has for example, the highest business, so translation needs within the organization. Creating good partnership with vendors, with IT internally as well for this kind of projects. And education is also something that for me it's very important within an organization to create a continuous sustainable model, meaning educating the users to understand AI in general, understand that the AI is not perfect, that is not going to be trained only by submitting data for translation, that some people think about it, so you just like, oh, I submit a document that I will learn by itself. Well, doesn't really work like that, right? Also to be able to, understand a little bit the difference between the marketing talk and the reality of things. So, and how to use it for your own purposes. Educate them also on not necessarily go out and throw everything you can find on free online tools, because that's also something that happens. So you have to provide something within the organization that is appealing to your people, that they can use, and they can avoid exposing lots of interesting confidential business information to other sets of eyes. And of course, it's important for the continuity and sustainability of this model that other partners within the organization are involved. And not last but not least, I would say the legal and security teams. Don't forget them. They will be very much upset about it. And then there is a sustainability from side of the environment, so the more corporate social responsibility. What does it mean? I think more and more organizations are looking, when they are selecting systems for doing whatever thing, but also machine translation, to select vendors that they are actually having fair practices towards their own employees. There is lots of due diligence done. So beware if people are exploiting, translators or things. This will come out somehow in internet information and will be used to make a selection. So prefer inclusive options, prefer options that are treating people fairly. And responsible sourcing in terms of the environment, it's a very interesting topic that we were talking about with Christian the other day, also about green AI, green MT. What does it mean? Will there be a time, and I can think about it, where people will actually ask to put an energy label on AI systems, like you do it on a refrigerator, A to F. So how much CO2 are you actually producing with your model? And then, since the environmental policies are becoming so strong within big organizations, and we saw the presentation from Christine yesterday talking about it, but also big organizations that are not in big tech, they are really, really interested into these environmental goals. This might become in the future a requirement, so something that the people will ask in the request for proposal. So how are you dealing with CO2, with what is your company doing for that as well? So in the search of a vendor, if you're doing internal machine translation in your organization, one interesting thing that is from my prior employer, actually, we were producing quite some CO2, because you can imagine, 400 million words a day using GPUs is not nothing. But the warmth produced by our data centers was reused, recycled within the building to actually warm up the building during the winter time. So it was actually quite an interesting way of recycling, or, well, try to contribute to that cause, even if you can't avoid, polluting the environment a little bit. And yes, do not retrain if not necessary. I mean, we saw it before. Quality has come to such a level, so especially from organization, and it's not because of being stingy or not wanting to spend money on it. It's really because sometimes it's not really needed to get into that level of retraining or processing that can harm the environment for maybe a very small improvement in quality. And I think that's everything I wanted to say. So I'm actually leaving you with how would have Samuel Johnson defined machine translation? I was thinking this morning, like, if you're looking at this dictionary, of course, machine translation was not existing, but look at machine, look at translation, combine them, and then you will get something, a complicated piece of workmanship to turn one language into another. I think it's correct, especially the part of the complicated, in my opinion. So thank you. That's everything from my side.
Thank you, Laura, for this very interesting perspective. I think you touched on a number of different points that we, when we're looking at things from a very technical perspective, don't usually think of, but you do run into from a user perspective, and just goes to show, you know, that your background is quite vast and you've seen many of these things already. So thank you very much for this presentation. I'm sure there's a couple of questions. So questions? Okay. Then thank you again very much. Oh yeah, please, okay.
Laura, I loved your holistic view. You gave us a lot to talk about. I was just thinking, you have this 20 years of experience doing this in your organization. There's another organization doing exactly, mostly the same thing, right? And we don't learn from each other. In your perspective, with all your experience, how could we combine this knowledge in a more convenient way, let's say it like this? How can we benefit each other from knowing all these things that we keep in a very secret way inside each organization? I don't have an answer, but I would like to have your thoughts on this.
I don't think it's very secret. I think it's happening on other platforms. There is lots of the talks going on in other conferences like Gala, Lockwood, because it's where the business side is going mostly, and that's a problem of getting that integration with, I guess, the academic world, and understanding where the priorities, where is the business focus actually, what is the business looking at, and where is the research focusing? Well, I see lots of overlap, so luckily something is going well, but it's also, sometimes it feels like it's even, I don't know, slower than the expectations. So in speech-to-speech translation is one of these examples where I think people are expecting it to be there now. And it will be years till is something, somebody nodding, yes, you think it as well, yeah. So, yeah, I don't know, I don't have the answer either. I think it's probably creating more of this merging like you are trying to do with EAMT as well. So to create the user track, get the users also attracted to this conference and mix more, so that we can exchange this kind of information.
At the back. People took some time to digest, come up with the questions.
Yeah, no worries.
Hello, thank you for the talk. I would like to ask about who is responsible for educating the users? Providers of machine translation, us, researchers, or who? Thank you.
It depends, I guess, because not every organization like mine has a program manager for machine translation within the organization. So in that case, you can kind of insource that role of educator and evangelist towards the organization. In case there is none like that, I do believe, yes, the vendors, so people who are actually proposing the solution. Yeah, of course, sometimes there is lots of marketing talk into that goes into that, but I think it should be, and I have good experiences with that, luckily, with the vendors that we are using, but of having people who are really telling you, this is what you can achieve, this is what you cannot do, watch out for what you're doing, and so forth. But if you have you're lucky to have somebody within, I think it's also shared responsibility with, for example, the data security team, people who are, can inform people. So we have lots of training, corporate training about you shouldn't send. This morning I couldn't copy the presentation on a USB stick because my company blocks the copy to hard drives, right? But then maybe they don't tell people don't go out to Google Translate online, or these kind of things, and also do not submit whatever information to machine translation. So if something contains patient data, in our case in life sciences, you can't really just say throw something there, and especially if you have the machine translation, don't necessarily give it to somebody else. So it depends on whether you have somebody internal who can do it, or otherwise, yeah, I would say the vendor itself, yeah.
There was another question.
Yes, sorry, I abducted the microphone already. Thank you for the very interesting talk. And I actually kind of want to pick up on a slightly similar topic as what Ketam already started here, which is the educating the clients part. And I started thinking of this whole question of good enough quality, and not everything needs to be premium quality. And I'm not disagreeing with that. I fully understand these distinctions that we want to make. However, sometimes this problem crops up where maybe the client doesn't actually know what they want. So they'll say that they want one thing, yeah, this is good enough for us. However, after the project is done and sent, they're suddenly not happy with it because they expected something else. So maybe it also connects with these perhaps unrealistic expectations of what you can achieve with, let's say, machine translation or like post-editing. So how do you, or is this something that has come up for you, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, it does come up, and it's, well, I think there is a little bit of a disconnect between, maybe at the vendor side, more like between the marketing team or sales team and the technical team. Actually, it's not only in the translation industry, it's everywhere. So you always say, well, Martin is laughing, yeah. So sales teams, of course, are telling one story, which is very beautiful, and obviously it's the key message that the customers have to take, but then there is the reality of things is a little bit more painful sometimes, and you have to tell that as well. That starts with, I guess, creating the right expectations in customers about what can be done, what cannot be done. And then, yes, understanding the user requirements very well, because people might tell you something and mean something else. So it's also in the ability, I think, of a vendor to read a little bit the mind of the customer, to understand. It's also a matter of experience. I don't think you have one answer, but yeah, understanding, putting them on paper, letting them sign with blood what they said, so they cannot complain anymore afterwards. Yeah. But it's a problem, yes.
Thank you. I also would like to, sorry. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I also would like to thank you for the talk. It was very broad, and I think it really showcased a lot of insight into the industry. I also would like to touch upon the definition of what is like what means that the machine translation is good enough. When, for example, there are like low resource languages where machine translation is being incorporated, and then from the LSP's standpoint, the desire is that the translators perform machine translation post-editing. So how would you bridge the gap between machine translation that is being incorporated into the workflows, and also oftentimes the linguists who are not necessarily trained to perform MTPE, and also they're just being told to perform it? Like, how would you improve the relationship between MT and the linguists for the scenarios where MT is just being incorporated?
Interesting one. I kind of sense, but you know, I didn't work on the side of LSPs if not for a brief time. So my sensation that comes down to pricing. So that if people are fairly compensated for what they are doing, it's not a big deal. And the problem is, what is fair compensation for post-editing? I don't know if some of you has the answer, please give it to me, but do you have to do it per word, per hour, per edit distance changes? So if people are using a system that, you know, makes them effective, 90% more effective than what they were, of course you can pay them much less. But if people are actually, their productivity is increasing 30%, they have to be compensated in a very fair way, in my opinion. But that's a very difficult topic, indeed. I can't hear you. Wait seconds.
Thank you. So I think you touched upon that when, for example, using machine translation through post-editing, there is an efficiency boost since we think that the output is helpful. Have you experimented with actually increasing the rates under the understanding that the throughput that is being done per hour increases as well?
No, well, I haven't experimented with that, no.
And would you think this is the way to go, to experiment, like also do an analysis on this?
I don't know. I would ask somebody else if they have maybe the
Okay.
answer for you here in the... Anybody? From the LSP side? No? I guess not yet. We don't
Okay.
have the answer yet. It's an interesting topic. I mean, for me, the fair compensation of post-editing activities is still something that bothers me. We're having lots of discussions within the organization as well. Should we go in that direction of doing more post-editing? We are not doing much yet. But what is actually fair compensation for your freelancers or something doing that post-editing is, and I think it has to really kind of be proportional to the amount of effort that they are doing. If somebody is simply reviewing and changing a comma, that's a review task. But if somebody is really like, changing, rewriting everything, you have to pay them for rewriting everything.
Yeah, I think it touches upon, for example, like in our case, there is no commercial engine for Canadian French, and the translators, they're not even accustomed to performing post-editing. So if you are releasing such like EAMT that is specialized for a given customer, linguists are also slightly perplexed as to how to perform this task. And there, I think, could be also that they're weary of switching from the traditional process to MTPE. Therefore, I was just curious, if somebody else had done similar experiences. Well, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. I would suggest maybe if anybody's got a view on that, that after the talk we can talk about that as well. There's one more question there at the back as well.
Thank you also for the presentation. So having gone through the long and probably really complex process of selecting an MT vendor, what would determine you to switch? What would they have to get wrong? Maybe you have a friend of a friend who's gone through this,
No,
Thank
I mean, I think that the criteria that I was showing before. So once you have, you start with a vendor, right? It's not like if you're satisfied, you will probably continue forever. It's not like you're saying you necessarily need to switch, but sometimes there might be some criteria popping up, like scaling the system or integrating it in some things. Like there are vendors who can make it, some vendors who might not be able to help you, and that's why you might want to switch. Language coverage could be also one of those things. I think I would say quite safely it's not quality. So not necessarily quality. Because quality, you can kind of, get there, like you customize, you hyper-customize to your case, and it's also very difficult when you're actually customize one system. It's a little bit of a pain point as well. You customize the system with a vendor to say, I'm going to another one, because you have to start from scratch. So not because of the technical effort, because of trying to explain to your boss, I have to spend the same amount of money to do something on another system for getting a slight improvement in quality. That won't work. But if the system is not able to support, to integrate easily in other things, or it doesn't comply to some security regulations or whatever other things, then that might be a reason to switch.
Thank you. We got one more over there.
Yes, my question would be about the GDPR and all these categories, data, privacy, security, that you had. Do you think this is an obstacle to MT and AI development in general, or do you think that in some years we will have research teams working only on this? For example, what about user authentication, voice interfaces?
It is an obstacle because let's say for the deployment, it's an obstacle because sometimes when you're deploying, for example, from a large multinational which has offices in the whole world, there are countries who have very special requirements, like the data doesn't have to leave that country. So it has technically to be on a server in that country. And this is becoming an obstacle. I'm not dealing with it directly, luckily, so there is an IT team who does this kind of things, but they vet systems according to this. So they look at, does the system have the ability of having the data center, located in multiple places where I can, I can safely say I comply with the regulation of Russia, of China, or Europe. So yes, it is an obstacle to deployment, yes. But it's not something that cannot be overcome. So the vendor can do something to get there if it doesn't have it in place.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the talk. I have a question regarding the paratranslators. What would, in your opinion, be the most effective way of taking inventory of everyone who takes part in this translation process, one, and two, how would you, what would, according to you, be the best way of convincing everyone in a company that they contribute to the whole machine translation workflow?
So the first question I didn't understand is like to how to know who is doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very difficult. And I actually was hoping to find a little bit more research. I don't know if you know anything about this kind of topic, but if you have access to some more research in this, I would really be interested. How you find it. I find it by chance. So talking to people who actually want access to machine translation system, and then I say, how are you using it? Oh, I do translation of newsletters, or I do this, I do that. So people are doing it, and this is so this study was pretty interesting for me, because was other multinationals, like almost 90% was doing this. Even to the point that the people in the paper say we recruit, so the people recruit multilingual people so that they can do translation work next to whatever is also required from them from an engineering perspective or whatever other perspective. So that one is difficult, and I actually hope that some research is going to be able to give us some methods to do that. One way could also be to monitor how many people are going out to online tools, because mostly they have these translation needs. Either they are trying to write something in a language they don't know, and then they use MT for that, or they need to understand something. They might post-date it, I don't know, but so that is something that you could work with security teams, cybersecurity teams to monitor, not in Europe because it's very difficult because of privacy regulations, but in other countries to see how many people are doing that. And the second question was about how to capture the feedback, you mean?
No, how to convince everyone in company-wide that they actually participate in creating better translations. So especially for subject matter specialists, that's sometimes really difficult because all they're focused on is on getting their texts right and not on contributing to machine translation systems.
Luckily, I don't have this experience. So in our company, people are actually quite willing to give that feedback. But if you would provide a tool where they don't feel that they are giving the feedback, so very simple interface, like let them work in a simple interface to do their post editing, and you capture that feedback behind the scenes, I think you don't have that problem.
Okay, we're getting to the close. Is there one final question still, or have we had all of the questions?
Yeah, Andrew.
There's one final one. Okay, last question.
Hi, thank you for the talk. It was really interesting. I have a question about post-editing. So, on the one hand, you have raw MT, which is really breaking through in the industry. On the other hand, you have post-editing, which is, in my opinion, stagnating. If you ask a linguist about post-editing, they're like, yeah, it doesn't really help me, it doesn't boost my productivity, unless maybe I have to translate something outside of my specialization. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about post-editing as a service nowadays?
Don't know if it's more of a question for an LSP. I don't know if I have the right experience to answer this question, in the sense that we outsource lots of the translation work to LSPs, so maybe the LSPs are more like, yeah. Actually, I'm coming from the life science industry, and I can tell you there is lots of still reluctance to use post-editing anyhow. So it's not only the post-editing because it doesn't make me more efficient, it's more post-editing in the sense of it can never achieve the quality that I can get as a human, which is something that probably here nobody believes, but yeah, in the life sciences, it's a little bit more of a matter. And in the use cases I work with before, it's for more raw machine translation. So yeah, I don't know that. I think it's more of a question for LSPs.
Okay. Loads of questions.
Yeah.
Good discussion.
Like it.
Great presentation. So thanks a lot again, Laura. Big applause
Thank
for Laura,
you.
please.
Thanks.